Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about the finishing things that I do on each quilt. Whether it's a wall quilt, a big quilt, no matter. Most every quilt that I make, I have three things that I consider when I'm done with the quilt. The first thing that I do when I'm finished with, especially a wall quilt or most quilts, is I trim the edges so that the quilt is square. And so on this one, well, if you want them to be straight, this one I decided I wanted straight edges, and I wanted them to be nice and square and straight. So I did that with a rotary cutter and two big rulers. Now it's fine if you want to put curved edges in, but that's another lesson. So this one has straight edges, got it all ready for the three things that I'm going to do. And every quilt, the first thing I think about is where am I going to put the label and what kind of label am I going to put. I've already done a little video on labels. So for this quilt, I decided I would just use a store-bought. These are store-bought. You can buy like a half of a yard of labels that are printed up, and I cut one out, and then I turned under the edges on two sides. Usually I put my labels in the same place each time, so I usually put them on the back on the right side. So here I've pressed under the two sides that are going to be out. These two sides will be included in the binding, so they are fine to leave there. I've pinned them down. I will hand sew this to here, and then I will use a basting stitch to do the last two sides because they're going to be included. The next thing I think about, if it's a wall quilt, or if I might be putting a quilt in the fair or in a show, I always think about putting a sleeve on the back. In order to put a sleeve on, it's very easy. You can do it before you put any binding on. I measured the quilt across the top. This quilt, I think, measured about 18 inches. So then I take a piece of fabric, and this is just some white or cream muslin. I cut a rectangle that's 1 inch less than the width of my quilt. So I think I cut this rectangle at 17 inches this way. They are always 9 inches this way. Cut the rectangle. I turn in and press the two edges just by turning it in and turning it in again, so I have a finished edge, and sew it on the sewing machine. Fold it in half, and I give it a press. And in just a little bit, I will pin it to the top of this quilt, and then take a basting stitch right across the right, maybe 1/8 of an inch from the top. And that way, when I put my binding on, it will cover up this top section. So then all I'll have to do is sew this down. And I believe there may be something on my website about making this type of a sleeve. So there's the first thing is the label, then I consider the sleeve. The third thing is the binding. The binding can be either a facing, but this time I decided I would do a regular binding. So in order to know how much you need to cut, I took and measured the 4 sides, add them up, and then it depends on how wide or how much fabric you have, but I had some regular fabric that was 40 inches wide. So I divided by 40 and figured out I needed 3 full strips. Oh, and I don't know if I mentioned, once you add the 4 sides up, you have to add 12 inches on extra too. So this was like 18 and 18 and 27 and 27, and then I added 12 on, so you have plenty. So I had 3 strips that are 40 inches long, and there's a couple of ways that you can do this binding. One way that I sometimes do is I just take let's do it this way first. I just take a ruler and my cutter, and I just cut the edges at 45-degree angle. That works just fine. You just have to make sure when you lay them out, you're going to lay them so that you have a diagonal seam. The other way is to lay out one, lay out another one on top, draw a line, and then sew on the line. For me, that seems like it takes a little extra time, so I don't want to fuss with that, but that's a perfectly good way to do it. So once you have your binding cut, and you're going to sew it together into one long strip, and then fold it in half on the ironing board so that you're ready to apply it. I'm not going to take time to show you how I do the binding here, but there's many different places where you can see that, and I may do that in a following video. So there you go, 3 things that I always do. You don't have to do the sleeve business if you're not going to show it or hang it. If you're going to give it to a grandchild, you don't need that sleeve. You do always need to have this label. That's very important. And you do need to finish the edges some way. So you can decide on how you want to finish your edges. But there's 3 things you always need to do. Get them all done and your quilt will be finished and great and very lovely. Thank you for watching.